Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to the tie-in. Welcome, Dr. Jodi Nelson-Taybor, to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining. You are the Business Development and Training Manager at Final Pixel Academy. Tell us how you started in that, how you started in sustainability. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. I'm actually the head of Final Pixel Academy now, so that was a previous version, but it's been a very accelerated promotion, just simply from where we started. So I'll just give you a little bit of context in who Final Pixel is first. We're an innovation agency and creative filmmaking, filmworks company with verticals across innovation, production, world building, and training. And so I head up the training component. And Michael, who is our CEO, we met approximately 3 years ago. So this was right around COVID time. Mandalorian had just come out. Everybody was wondering what virtual production was. And I was actually a senior lecturer at a university. And I was really keen to understand what virtual production was and more importantly, how the heck are we going to teach these skills, because there was no literature, there was no documentation on what virtual production actually was, let alone how are we going to teach it. And so I had won a grant award from an organization here called Story Futures, who had put out funding for a cohort that was looking at train the trainer kind of program. And I was really interested in deploying a virtual production simulation so that we could run an end-to-end virtual production with very limited funds during COVID, with faculty who had never done virtual production before, to figure out what it was, what it meant, and have a better understanding of workflows that had changed, tremendously from traditional film practice. So it was a skills shift. It was a cultural shift. It was a new way of working. And of course, we came right in the middle of COVID. So one of the outputs of that experience was then to deploy it in a classroom, like build workshops. How are we going to train this to future students? And Michael had found some of my post on LinkedIn, and they were in the virtual production space. They had been working for about a year, and it just seemed like tremendous growth. It was a huge explosion of virtual production. And what he had recognized very quickly was that if we do not train up our crew, there is not going to be a virtual production industry. And what we have since learned is obviously the huge amounts of benefits for virtual production, and particularly around sustainability, DEI practices, which these are core pillars of our company. And we try to embed them from the education, almost like at a grandstand, so that it can be implemented in the early stages rather than thinking about it as an add-on or becomes a line item on a budget for production. So all of our DEI practices, which is diversity, equality, inclusion, as well as accessibility and social mobility, have become a really important factor in using virtual production as a methodology of film practice to give a more inclusive and better working environment for people to come and work in an industry that they love. And of course, the sustainability factor is such a huge component. There was a Time magazine article, there's been quite a few come out, but essentially that, films on average, depending upon what size production they are, could be 391 metric tons up to something like over 3,000 metric tons, which a tent pole, for example, like Oppenheimer or Barbie, for example, can be equivalent to powering 656 homes a year. And that's one production. Yeah. And so, virtual production allows us to mitigate those risks through less company moves, less travel, less large set builds. So we have less wastage on the other end. Obviously working inside of studios, like, for example, Sky Studios here, which has won a sustainability award. So it's a collective of industry partners coming together to try and solve those problems. So that in a
Yeah.
nutshell is kind of who we are.
Wow. Wow. And you're in the UK,
Yes.
right? Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, just to kind of unpack that a little bit. I'm
Hmm.
curious, when you mentioned a few years ago, kind of coming to this and realizing that there was no training around this. What did the development of that training, like, engaging with those faculty members and whatnot? Can you walk us through how you were
Hmm.
thinking about it at that time?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was learning as well. I think we're all still growing because the technology is emerging so fast. I mean, the new shiny toy in the in the sandbox is now AI. And so we're constantly having to stay ahead of, bleeding edge technologies and find ways to make sure that they are integrated and also have that inclusivity as part of the training. So it was really a part and parcel of just one step based on our expertise. I mean, all the faculty had worked in industry, so they had traditional film and television backgrounds, so they understood that training. But what was really interesting is because virtual production blends games engines, live events, broadcast, all these kind of specialisms from different areas, which are typically siloed in education. It was the blending of all of these faculties coming together to learn from each other and to create in real time. And so out of that, and then once, of course, I started working, we brought Final Pixel in actually as the experts in the field because we saw that the challenges we were facing on set, we were able to take straight into training. So it's that really fast-paced, evolution of knowledge exchange and being able to adapt to the constantly changing environment of a production. So the faculty, it's a real, we train across a lot of different cohorts. We train obviously for train the trainer, so faculty who need to also train and be able to upskill and train their students, but also professional crew, crew that's been in the industry 20, 25 years, are trying to, suddenly being thrust into this environment where they're having to engage with this new technology. And this is across all of the heads of department roles. And how do they engage with each other? And also in a new workflow that essentially brings a VFX heavy post production process to the front. So you have lots of agency, you've got lots of iteration and lots of agility, and quite often we're seeing that it's not just the hard skills, the technical skills that people need to learn, but it's also those human soft professional skills that are really very relevant. And those, I sit on quite a few boards, and also in our professional training environments. It doesn't matter how many years of training you have, those things are still very relevant and are constant in need of upskilling. So it takes a village, and it's certainly not something that is easily rectified through a training program, but that's essentially what we did. And over the course of 3 years, with these new advancement of trainings, we've delivered many trainings now, and obviously have those feedback loops. We've had a lot of productions under our belts, as well as all of our industry partners and peers throughout the industry who are constantly sharing knowledge. It's quite a small core group of virtual production experts globally that are working in the field in this way. So it's we're trying to find ways, mechanisms to where we can get the information out as much as possible, because it's just going to be called production in the future. It's really just another tool for using in production.
Jodi, just to so I'm clear, and for our listeners, where are folks going post the program? How long are they studying in the program for? Do you offer sort of the virtual studio services as well as part of that offering, or are your graduate students moving on to working embedded with the studios or other sort of VFX type companies?
Yeah. It's a really good question. Our company is quite unique in that we have all of those verticals. Quite often they are separate. They don't really exist in the same environment. But what's really interesting about our approach is that because we're able to have productions and offer those production services, we provide consultancy, we provide the whole end-to-end virtual production. We can provide an on-set VP team that just needs to be deployed. And also we can do the VAD, which is the virtual art department. So the designing of the environments, we've got in-house artists. So we really can deliver that whole end-to-end pipeline. But when it comes to the training component, and depending upon what the program is, we've delivered training everywhere from our online training courses, which are on demand so that people can access them anytime, anywhere. We also have our on-site training. So we work with stage partners. So we're quite agnostic when it comes to kit. We don't sell any equipment. We don't own a stage. So we really like to partner with other people in the community, different volumes and organizations around the globe who we come and partner and do training delivery for. And that training delivery can be a one-day taster. It can be an intensive week. It can be a 2-week train the trainer kind of focused course. And we have recently just finished our first year of a 9-month fellowship, which was funded by Screen Scotland up in Glasgow. And that was bringing together professionals working in the industry to come and upskill and to learn. And quite often we're seeing that a lot of these communities are looking to build inward investment. And that inward investment requires that you have skilled labor and you also have sustainability practices embedded in those business case models. So we try to help foster those relationships through our training and production relationships.
Did COVID, and everybody kind of distributed throughout, working from home and whatnot, did that accelerate or spur this virtual or virtual art department, for example, you mentioned, did it accelerate that experience and that need to train up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think first of all, we're a remote first company. So all of our core talent that we have, a lot of them are working here centrally in London, but we also have offices in LA and also New York. But when we do productions, we work sometimes with our VAD artists, sometimes technical artists, sometimes directors, working remotely in completely different countries. And what that allows us to do is to work with talent outside of our local area. And so refining those operation capacities, as well as communication workflows, managing projects remotely using software that allows us to do those jobs, I think has really launched new opportunities to be able to develop and create projects together with people that we normally wouldn't be able to do so.
Yeah, in terms of sustainability, are you finding that students are coming to your program with that sustainability in mind, or is that a secondary byproduct of the fact that everybody can be virtual and don't need to travel to go to work every day?
Yeah, it's funny. It's a dual issue. On one hand, we will go, say, to a classroom of 10-year-olds and we'll ask them, what are the benefits of virtual production? And the first thing they say is sustainability. They're on it, they get it. But you go to sort of, maybe older or people who've been in the industry for a long time, it then becomes a chore. It becomes a labor. It's like, it's a line item I have to consider, or it's other things it's carbon calculator. It's like, and so you have these dualities of opportunities, but also challenges. And I think also because of the nature of online training, this is something happening up and down in education, not just, in our sector, but it's those professional skills of making sure that you are present, that you're engaged, that you are fully participating, even if you're remote. Online training, it depends on how motivated the students are. The learning design is a really core component of getting that education. We offer digital badges. And then to your question previously, like what is the enrichment programs or where do they go next? Quite often, the students will either come and work on our projects as trainees, but then we also have our partners who also are looking for trainees or hiring that we quite often refer to as well. We are getting ready to launch a new membership that is going to have a much more robust networking and jobs career opportunity, because right now our industry is quite fragmented and it relies on word of mouth and sort of postings on LinkedIn when somebody needs a call for somebody. But I think also because we've been in this lag the sort of chasm for the last 2 years due to AI and strikes in Hollywood and COVID and all of those things, it's starting to begin to have a bit of an uptick, at least here in the UK. But we've lost a huge amount of freelancers in the business, and it's had a knock-on effect in our VFX departments, games departments. There's been huge numbers of layoffs that I know are happening in the States as well. So I think it's a reset just on so many different fronts that have to be thought through. It's quite a complex problem. And that's why I always tell, our clients when we share ideas and stuff, that not one company or a collective is going to be able to solve this. These are issues that have been well embedded, for a long time, but which are particularly around sustainability, are urgent. And I think that's where the education and the alignment within the creative industries is so pivotal and really key.
Yeah, we talk a lot about, and we say it broadly, but we talk about rethinking how we do business, right? Embedding sustainability, rethinking how we do business. And it sounds like you're really getting at that core question of rethinking how we do business through the sort of lens of virtual production and using virtual production as a tool in the toolbox. And I'm curious, you also mentioned talking to 10-year-olds, and they're excited and curious, and think, this is great for sustainability. And then those folks later in their career, who have been working a little while, might think this is a little more laborious to learn, and it's an add-on kind of thing, or an extra line item. I'm curious if you see, a milestone, a point in that sort of, trajectory of learning where, this starts to shift, or there's a touch point where we can infuse creativity and excitement along the way, so we don't get to that point. So we can really shift how we're thinking about the sort of laborious nature of all of this. Is there any place in that continuum that you see a real opportunity in the learning process?
Yeah, definitely. And I see there's a lot of organizations that are starting to implement green initiatives into different R&D projects or creative tender exercises. So for example, screenwriting competitions that only speak to sustainability or climate change issues, for example. Or there's a current tender out that is about greening the screen. So it's about empowering production companies to start thinking around how they're going to solve, sustainability and climate emissions issues within their own productions, and really shift the way in which they do business. And that, of course, has a knock-on effect for their whole pipeline in terms of how they run their day-to-day, their hiring practices, how they speak to clients, and how they bid on projects, how they price up their projects, and looking at virtual production, which sometimes quite often can be a barrier to entry because there's lots of technological obstacles. There's barriers to entry to get onto studio sites. There's the language barrier because it's got a lot of technical jargon. But then the whole, other elements around trying to be efficient and sustainable, as well as make it practical and affordable for creativity projects to move forward. It's not an easy solve, but I think by embedding it early as possible and embedding this into creative education projects, so whether it's group collaboration or we're asking them to think about their skill sets that they need to hone with the idea that they need to include these other things, is really important. Talking to a professional crew and training them around professional skills is not just about how to manage your etiquette on set, but also think about recruitment practices to have a more inclusive crew and talent who are going to work on your project. And also, where are those sustainability metrics that you're trying to hit? We've got lots of carbon calculators. There's lots of toolkits that have come out, which are really great. But again, it's not a one size fit all. It really does take someone who is focused on that, much like we had a COVID supervisor, someone who's really got their eye on the ball and is focused on just those initiatives to try and make sure it fits seamlessly within production. And it's not an annoyance, or it's not a buzzword or a marketing tool, to be used, but is actually solving real challenges in real time. And I think we are starting to see that, particularly in the advertising world. There's a couple of partners and organizations that are showing real data on where they're having those carbon savings in their productions by using virtual production, but also taking other sustainable measures. And I think that's really informative as well, because then from the education side, it's showing people who are coming up into the professional world that these things are real, sustainable, long-term, future-proofing changes, and you want to be a part of that trajectory. So it means understanding it from the core at the beginning of your learning experience.
Zena and I talk a lot about technology and the influence in film over the last 100+ years. Where do you think we are in this, the S curve of adoption, and how that's going to fare going forward? Because there are some major disruptive changes here afoot.
Oh yeah, definitely. It's really interesting. I was at an event last night that was at a lens company who had a DOP that was essentially demonstrating how to use AI workflows to scramble or to gather all of the metadata together using virtual production. So from the camera inputs all the way through to your live link to the brain bar, all the way through VFX and post-production. It was a bit, mind-blowing and way over my head. But that's just one kind of key area where there's major disruption, because they've got to implement that into all the rental houses. They've got to make sure all the DOPs and the camera operators and the technicians also understand those workflows, and also the terminology and the technology of plugging in. I think AI has the capability as another tool to solve a lot of our, current solutions. I don't think that it's a replacement. I don't think, there will be people that will probably lose some jobs. That's with any disruption and any new technology that comes into play. And it's about upskilling. And I always like to refer to Disney's Industrial Magic and Light, or whatever it was called, the documentary that they did on Apple, I think last year, where they were showing back in the 70s and Star Wars and doing all the practical effects, and then computer graphics and all of that came into play. And you had half of the talent going, well, that's the end of my career, done. And then the other half going, okay, I'm gonna, strap in, let's figure this out and upskill. And you could see the trajectory 20 years on of where they are at the forefront of that cutting edge. And I think we are facing that now. I quite often have a range of people from ages and experience asking me, is this for me? Should I try? Should I even, where you have younger people who, were born with Game Boys or whatever they call them now, the gaming pad, PlayStations in their hands, that they understand at least, the technical capabilities, but there's still massive gaps in their engagement and professional skills and social skills, because obviously they've been impacted by COVID and many more things that our older generation didn't have to experience. So it's this constant balance of, learning. Laura Franks had written this really great piece and showed this visual of this person kind of leaning over this chasm. And in this chasm were all of this terminology and changes in technology, basically asked the same question: where are we and where are we going? And what's the truth of how quickly we're going to be able to adapt to all of this? And the question is, we don't really know, because every time you think that you master a skill or you master it, something new comes along that disrupts it and causes you to change your way of applying what you did. But I think staying curious and staying open is a really great mindset to be able to adapt in the worlds that we are living in, because there's lots of challenges in the creative industries, and it's a lot of people have left, and it's really a sad state of affairs because there's so many talented people out there who have a lot to contribute. So as an industry, all of these capabilities that we're trying to figure out and solve, we almost, like, I think COVID had a reset button, and we have a real opportunity here. And I'm always the optimist around this, because I've met many people who are not, but I just choose to look at that as an opportune moment to reset the switch.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I'm curious, as the industry changes, as we now have more regulation, if you will, around reporting and transparency, I'm wondering, like, how are you thinking about the data component of all of this? How are you integrating that into your training, and what does it actually look like in terms of impact for virtual production? I'm just curious how you're thinking about connecting dots and whatnot around that data and reporting side.
Yeah, it differs from training scheme to training scheme. Quite often we are engaged with screen bodies we have a quite a robust funding process here that's very different from the States. So we have screen bodies who get funding from the government or from the High End and TV Film Fund, who put that directly back into training, which means that trainees don't have to pay for upskilling and training, which is great, but a lot of that doesn't really go far enough. They're not long-term training initiatives, but they really are, sometimes just taster sessions or maybe a deep dive into a specialist subject. Education is also trying to figure out, how do we meet those KPIs of bringing in new students and making sure that we deliver on those promises of education, and where is that impact actually showing? Is it, getting into a training program and getting a job and then job done, or is there other aspects that we need to look at? And depending upon which project we're working on, sometimes we will have a massive amount of reporting data that we have to supply, which is all around inclusivity, DEI, also our sustainability measures. What kind of training delivery we did, where did we deliver it, how long did it last, what were the training outputs that we expected, and learning outcomes similar to what we do in academia, but not necessarily with that quality assurance and assessment practicalities that you've got to have. Industry, it's really interesting that I've had a foot in both camps, because I think that both have a lot to offer. But it's the working together that has been missing for a very long time. And I think joining those dots together will have a greater impact than trying to do it separately, because we both have completely, industry and education have two completely different business models and ways in which they work. So being able to measure the impact of what we do, quite often SMEs and businesses don't have time to deal with all of that data. Whereas academics, obviously, you've got researchers you can employ and can do feasibility studies and impact case studies and all of that. So we try as a small team, but try to make sure that we implement all of that in all of our findings through feedback surveys, peer-to-peer reviews, and try to go and review those quarterly and yearly to see where can we make a bigger impact. How can we improve upon the services that we're offering, and also make sure that we're aligning with what the industry is asking for?
Yeah, and the flow of information between, what the industry is asking for and, your work at Final Pixel. Is it a smooth line of communication? Are you finding that folks are asking you for data more and more? Like, what does that look like?
Each time we deploy a training initiative that has a funding body behind it, so it's been commissioned by somebody, they will have some reporting mechanisms that are in place that will be required as part and parcel of the training delivery. So we have that to hand, and all of these individual collectives, obviously, we have to hand to be able to compare and contrast. Again, it requires another set of eyes of research and data management to be able to do that. But I sit on a couple of different boards, and those boards are collectively gathering information and data across employers, educators, technology technicians, to try and collectively pull those things together so that they can then report to the government, that then can make decisions on where there are gaps, where are the needs in the industry. There's quite a few industry reports that also come out that are also fed by our feedback through surveys. And so we take our on the ground initiatives and expertise and contribute to it in that way. And we have it internally, obviously, to continue to refine our practices as we go.
Yeah. Yeah. Working to better the field, if you will.
Trying to, yeah.
Yeah. No, I love it. I love it. It just seems like there's so much opportunity. Like this is definitely an opportunity space that that you're leading and people are stepping into. Have you seen more demand, as this training program, as you just ramped up over the last few years, has there just been more and more people like, as you say, we need to upskill, we need to get ahead of this, we need to,
Yeah. We working with partners around the world that, most of them are coming to me, which is great. That's wonderful to have. But they're all kind of different needs. It could be we're working with organizations within different countries who are, at a stage where they don't have an LED wall. So they're at the very beginning of their journey and trying to understand how do they, get the funding? How do they get the wall? Who are the different various manufacturers and vendors and people they need to be having conversations with? But at the same time, on those parallels is how do we bring in production? But then how do we skill up our crew to keep them home to have better sustainability outputs and metrics that we're trying to aim for, and it's not that it's trying to shut off communities from each other, but bringing that inward investment and giving opportunities for local talent is a real push and a real initiative. And it's going to be really interesting to see how, major production companies like the Amazons and the Netflixes, who are shooting productions around the world and working in various studios, that it's beyond just the stage, but it's also that inclusive community that can help bridge that divide and meet those aims. The same thing on sustainability, asking for data quite often. So we run a symposia once a year. When I was an academic, after I did my virtual production research project, one of the outputs was we created a one-day symposia called VP Green. Nobody was talking about virtual production in the green sustainability space, and it was really an opportunity to bring together stakeholders, from investors to production companies to vendors, to talk about what are the problems that we're facing. And that was purely what the first year was. The second year we went to Breda, which is in the Netherlands, outside of Amsterdam, and worked with Breda University to hold another symposia. And that year was, right, we've made some advances. What are some new things that are finding? At that point, Sony had come out with a green report. There was a green screen European report. So data was starting to come out, and more people, particularly productions and executive producers who are having to make financial decisions, are starting to look at that data as a real pivotal turning point for how they are deploying production. And so that means, barriers to entry, equipment, technology, things like that is starting to come down, but you're still seeing a lack of engagement because it is a new workflow. It is a new adoption of a production methodology. So I think that data is very key because it tells us where we're at, it tells us where we're going and where the gaps are. But it's a very complex mix of things that are way over my head with data scientists and, people that are working in that space. But every studio here has their own sustainability coordinator or someone who's running point on their sustainability. So it's great to see that they've invested in, that talent. They're definitely keeping an eye on it. And I've spoken on quite a few sustainability panels with different people in different working capacities. So there's a real passion for it because they're always well attended. People who are very interested in how it impacts, and it's not just their jobs, but their livelihoods as well. And I think people just really want to be part of this inclusive, creative, robust, industry that gives back, and provides opportunities and provides a really great space to work in, to where you feel good about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, true reset.
Amen.
how we think about all of this, because why suffer? Why think of it as a grind? Why, like,
Yeah.
let's rethink and revamp. And I think this
Mhm.
is certainly the opportunity space, and folks leaning into this virtual production space.
Taking that a bit further, are you seeing other industries where this work that you're doing can be applied to? Um,
Mhm.
and how do
Definitely.
you, yeah, how do you see that? Because it is, I mean, very specific to film, obviously, right now,
Mhm.
as a leader in sustainability. But are you
Mhm.
seeing that these skills that you're training move into other industries, or where would that uh, go from here?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely applicable for probably any industry that's running a business and, needs to apply sustainability measures, but also training staff, upskilling. There was the data from the World Economic Forum in terms of skills that you need of the future, and also predictions of how many people were going to be out of work if they don't. So I think this is definitely a global impact situation, not just in the creative industries. We are just one, obviously, having to deal with these challenges. But because we work across broadcast and live events and games, particularly in the creative industries, but it also intersects with fashion, with music, with design, as well. Manufacturing, health are all using these same technologies to help solve their problems. So I think there's definitely overlaps, maybe not in the subjects of what we are teaching, but around those fringes around professional skills, engaging with new technology and sustainability, it should all be, I think, embraced and included, DEI and inclusivity as well into training practices. I'm really impressed, and I'm probably biased, but I'm really impressed, working with Final Pixel. We are a representative company that has a very diverse workforce that is multicultural, multi-ethnic, age ranges from, very early entry to senior as well. We're a small team, and we have, a cultural, our cultural values are around human, inclusivity, innovation, and inspiration, and all of these things we try to aspire to in all of the work we do. And I think, and a lot of people respond to that, because I have a lot of people that are constantly saying, oh, I've seen a post, or we've come to a training, or we've worked on one of your productions before. And it just really sets a tone for how we expect people to also, carry themselves throughout the industry as well. So that's something I'm really proud of. And I think if more organizations embraced that culture and value aspect, rather than just it's a business model, or we're trying to make money, or we've got a product we got to spit out, or a competition in the marketplace, I think particularly young people are looking for so much more in those opportunities. And that includes coming into education. There's again, a real downturn in young people who want to get an education and go to university. And you have to ask why that is, because there's lots of opportunities to network and explore different ideas and figure out what it is that you want to do. So us providing training, enrichment opportunities, networking, and giving them an opportunity, I think is just as important as learning new technologies.
Awesome. Jodi, we're asking all of our guests the same question here near the
Okay.
end. So if you were to create a new playbook and guiding principles around sustainability and entertainment, uh, what would the top one or three things that you would suggest be included in those guiding principles be?
Wow. That's a big question. There's
Mhm.
so many things. Well, across, production capabilities, that sustainability is embedded before planning even begins, so that there's a well thought process. And even in training, we are embarking upon a new tour in Ireland come September. And one of the things I wanted to do was to lay over a sustainability map on that entire project. Because after all, it's a rock and roll tour, shooting VP in, multiple stages and multiple cities. And we have a real opportunity to sort of set a precedent around that kind of activity. And you're looking at like the Coldplay tour as of late, and several initiatives like the UN Sustainability Development Goals, and the BAFTA Albert tools. So I think, that initiative would be to start implementation in the early planning phases, to look at all of the touch points across that delivery that need to be addressed, and how to mitigate it as best as possible. That would probably be my biggest takeaway, because there's lots of things obviously that will then come with that: less travel, less build, catering practices, hotels and locations, and staying at places that have high sustainability numbers and ratings. And those all come together. But I think if you plan in the beginning stages, it impacts the way in which you collectively collaborate and create. And also it gives you an opportunity to think about inclusion. And that may be from your cast, from your crew, what kind of creative story you want to tell, and what kind of impact you're wanting to make. So I would say that would be my playbook.
It's so relevant, it's beyond, it's even before relevant. You know what I mean? It's just like, this is the core foundation. One of my questions that we asked, is that I have this visual that I want to start mapping out, but the technology shifts in film, and you referenced it as well, and in terms of computing and so on, but it goes way back to just the early days of film. And now we're at that moment, right? And it's so curious to really see where this all goes. It's
well, even when you look at historical stuff, like back when backlit stages, and even in the early stages of Lumiere Brothers and all the effects and stuff, so there's virtual production has existed since then. It just wasn't called virtual production, and it was in various different components. It's only since COVID and the bringing together of LED walls, camera tracking, and games engines that all of a sudden this opens a whole new field of opportunities, and out of that challenges and obstacles come new solutions to those innovations. And I think that's going to continue to happen, particularly as we accelerate with technology. So it's definitely an exciting space to be in. There is a lot of opportunities. People like yourselves who are giving lending an ear and an opportunity for people to talk about it in a different sector, I think is such a great wonderful thing as well, because I learn so much from listening and watching other people in the space and the things that they do too, which I think are really important for that knowledge sharing. So thank you again for everything that you're doing. Really appreciate it.
Awesome.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Dr. Jodi Nelson-Taybor, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights. I mean, this is quite an opportunity space, and I'm excited to share this all with our listeners and to learn more as we go, because there's a lot still to uncover, I think.
Just the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's been a real honor. Thank you. I appreciate it.
I feel like I could talk to her all day and really start to peel that onion on virtual production, education. How are you engaging people? It's just a lot of information to take in. And it seems like they're really on the cutting edge.
It's almost, it really is the history of film right now and unfolding in front of us. And I think it's exciting, but as she alluded to there, it was hard to hear that she said, yeah, some people will lose their jobs. Those aren't words that you want to hear. However, at the same time, there'll be completely new jobs created in a whole new field of production. And I think that's critical to the understanding here of what we're working towards.
Yeah. There's a pathway, right? There's she talks about that. That's what they do, is upskill people. So even if a traditional job might not exist in the same way, this is, I think, the pathway for upskilling and transitioning into that next phase, that next job description that we haven't even quite written yet. It's and the education and the pathway for that is that's what they're doing. So
Yeah.
I
And
think
production
there's
as a leader, right? Production as a leader. And I mean, even a look at live entertainment. I mean, look at where would live music be without LED? I mean, LEDs make music production, the same sort of deal. We're just seeing the film and entertainment industry adopt these new technologies, create the path forward, and then you're seeing that fan out from there. And I think that what virtual production and Jodi's working on is truly that. It's that beachhead for this next change.
Sure, for sure. And, it's just, it blows my mind, the creativity out there in the world and how that kind of comes together in, the media industry and what people are working on and the just wild, like mind-blowing things that they're creating and putting on the screen the way they do that for, us all to consume and enjoy. Like it's just really cutting edge. And I think, Jodi is really working hard to make it happen.
Hey, listeners. If you have a story about innovation and sustainability in entertainment, please get in touch with us at tieinpodcast@gmail.com. That's TIEIN podcast, all one word, @gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. We may ask you to be a guest on the show.
If you like today's conversation and want to hear more, please like us and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Our producer is Colin Miller.